50 years. This is how long it took for him to receive recognition of the service he provided in Vietnam. 50 years of silence, of red tape, of a system that betrayed one of its own. But then, last month, the letter came. There was a truth, hidden for 50 years, and it is this question that stays in my mind until now. Why was it that the truth was classified for such a long period of time? What my father, this man, did that day was the saving of 43 lives. However, what happened afterward was apparently too much for the people of America to handle. I am Thomas Martinez, son of Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez, United States Army, 1st Cavalry Division. He died in 2022 at the age of 74. Never having received a Medal of Honor, he deserved for his actions on April 9, 1971, in the A Shau Valley, Vietnam. This is a recollection of what he did, why his story was suppressed, and finally, the truth came out 53 years later. My father didn't talk about Vietnam, not when I was growing up, not when I joined the Army myself, not even when he was dying and I begged him to share his stories. He'd shake his head, look away, and say only, "Some things stay in the valley, Tommy. Some things don't come home." I thought he meant trauma. PTSD, the kind of demons all combat veterans carry. It wasn't until after his funeral, when I received the letter from the Department of Defense, that I understood he meant something else entirely. The letter arrived on December 15, 2025, official Department of the Army letterhead. My hands shook as I opened it. Dear Mr. Martinez, after a comprehensive review spanning multiple years, the Department of Defense has completed its assessment of Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez's actions on April 9, 1971, in the Republic of Vietnam. We write to inform you that your father's service has been formally recognized with an upgrade of his Silver Star to the Medal of Honor. This recognition comes with our deepest apologies for the delay in proper acknowledgement of his extraordinary valor. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration, awarded posthumously 54 years after the action that earned it. Why so long? The letter included a packet of declassified documents. What I read in those pages changed everything I thought I knew about my father's service. Let me start with what the official record said, the version my father lived with for 50 years. On April 9, 1971, Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez was leading a 12-man reconnaissance patrol in the A Shau Valley near the Laotian border. His unit came under heavy fire from a numerically superior North Vietnamese force. Despite being wounded, Martinez coordinated the defense, called in air support, and held the position until reinforcements arrived. 8 Americans survived. For this action, he was awarded the Silver Star. That's what the Army told my family. That's what his official citation said. That's what we believed. It was a lie, not a complete lie. That part happened. But it was maybe 10% of the truth. The declassified documents told a different story. My father's patrol wasn't a routine reconnaissance mission. They were part of a classified operation called Prairie Fire. Studies and Observations Group, SAG, cross-border operations into Laos. Highly classified. So classified that even 50 years later, most of the details remain redacted. The mission: locate and extract a downed Air Force pilot who'd been shot down 3 days earlier over Laotian territory. Intelligence indicated the pilot was alive, held by NVA forces at a temporary camp 15 clicks inside the border. 12 men. Deep into enemy territory. No air support available due to weather. No backup. Complete radio silence after insertion. They found the pilot, Captain James Wilson, F-4 Phantom pilot. He'd been shot down during an arc light strike, and had evaded capture for 2 days before the NVA finally caught him. By the time my father's team located him, Wilson had been beaten, interrogated, and was barely conscious. The camp holding him had about 20 NVA soldiers. Light security. They weren't expecting a rescue attempt this deep in Laos. My father made a decision. Instead of calling for extraction and leaving the pilot to his fate, he initiated an immediate assault. 12 Americans against 20 battle-hardened NVA troops in the middle of enemy-controlled territory with no support. It should have been a massacre. It almost was. The firefight lasted 40 minutes. In the chaos, my father took 3 AK-47 rounds, one through his left shoulder, shattering the clavicle, one that grazed his ribs, one that tore through his thigh, missing the femoral artery by less than an inch. But he didn't stop. The classified after-action report, written by the one surviving SOG commander who witnessed what happened, describes my father's actions in detail that still makes my blood run cold. Staff Sergeant Martinez, despite catastrophic wounds, single-handedly assaulted an enemy machine gun position that had pinned down the extraction team. Using grenades and rifle fire, he neutralized 3 combatants and destroyed the weapon. As the team moved to secure Captain Wilson, Martinez provided covering fire from an exposed position, drawing enemy attention and allowing the successful extraction of the pilot. When informed of approaching enemy reinforcements, Martinez volunteered to remain behind to delay their advance. It was only through direct order that he was convinced to withdraw with the team. They got out with 11 men. 1 soldier, Specialist Derek Patterson, had been killed in the initial assault. But they got the pilot. Captain Wilson survived. And my father spent the next 3 months in a military hospital having shrapnel removed from his body. So why wasn't he awarded the Medal of Honor then? Why the Silver Star instead? Because none of it could be acknowledged. Prairie Fire operations were classified. The United States wasn't officially operating in Laos. Admitting that we'd conducted a cross-border raid to rescue a downed pilot would have been a diplomatic and political nightmare. So the Army did what it does. It sanitized the story. The citation for my father's Silver Star mentioned actions during combat operations in the A Shau Valley. Technically true. The A Shau Valley extends to the Laotian border. No mention of crossing that border, no mention of the rescue, no mention of the actual heroism that saved a pilot's life. The men who were there were told to never discuss the mission. Standard operating procedure for SOG operations. Most of them kept that silence their whole lives, including my father. Before I continue with my father's story, I want to acknowledge something. There are countless veterans whose service has been classified, whose heroism will never be fully known, whose families live with only partial truths. If this story resonates with you, if you've served or know someone who has, please subscribe. We're building a community where these stories, however late they come, can finally be told. Daily uploads honoring the service and sacrifice of America's military families. The years after Vietnam were hard for my father. Not just because of his wounds, though the shoulder never fully healed and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life, but because of what he couldn't say. He came home to a country that didn't want to hear about Vietnam, to a culture that treated veterans with suspicion at best, contempt at worst. And he carried the truth of what he'd done, what his men had done, locked behind walls of classification. He met my mother in 1973. She was a nurse at the VA hospital where he was receiving treatment. They married 6 months later. She knew he'd been wounded in combat. She knew he had nightmares. She never knew the full story. I was born in 1975, 2 days after the fall of Saigon. My father was watching the news coverage when my mother went into labor. He once told me that watching the helicopters evacuating from the embassy rooftop while driving to the hospital was the most surreal experience of his life. All of it, he said. All the sacrifice, all the blood, all the brothers we lost, and it ended with people hanging off helicopters trying to escape. He never said anything more about Vietnam after that conversation. He worked as a mechanic, fixed cars, trucks, anything with an engine. He was good at it, meticulous, patient. The same skills that made him a good NCO made him a good mechanic. Fix the problem, do it right, move on to the next one. He taught me everything about engines, how to diagnose problems by sound, how to rebuild a carburetor, how to check timing. Weekend afternoons in our garage, oil on our hands, radio playing, just working together. Those are my best memories of my father. He never wore his uniform, never went to VA events, never joined the VFW or American Legion. I asked him once why not. "Those guys want to remember," he said. "I'm trying to forget." But he couldn't forget. None of them can. When I turned to 18 and told him I was joining the Army, he didn't try to talk me out of it. He just looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Different Army now," he said. "Different wars, different world, but some things don't change. Take care of your soldiers, Tommy. Always take care of your soldiers." I did 2 tours in Iraq, 3 in Afghanistan. Made it to captain. Infantry officer. When I came home on leave, my father and I would sit in that garage, work on cars, and I'd tell him about my deployments. He'd listen, ask questions, offer advice based on his own experience. But he never told me about Laos, never mentioned Prairie Fire, never talked about the pilot he saved. In 2020, the COVID pandemic hit. My father's health, never great because of his wounds, deteriorated rapidly. By 2021, he was in hospice care. The doctors gave him months. I spent those months by his bedside. My mother, my wife, my kids, we all did. Watching this strong, silent man fade away was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. Harder than combat. Harder than anything. Near the end, when he was barely conscious, heavily medicated, he started talking about Vietnam. Not to me, not to anyone specifically, just talking, reliving it. "Wilson," he'd whisper. "We got Wilson. Tell his family we got him. The valley, still there. Can't leave the valley. Patterson's down, man down. Can't leave him." His nightmares, playing out in real time as his mind loosened its grip on the present. I tried to comfort him, to bring him back to the present. But part of me wanted to know, who was Wilson? Who was Patterson? What happened in the valley? My father died on March 12th, 2022. 74 years old, surrounded by family. The VA hospice nurse who was there said his last words, barely audible, were, "Mission complete." At his funeral, full military honors. A young Army lieutenant and 2 sergeants presented the flag to my mother. 21 gun salute, taps played while we stood in the cold March rain. Standard funeral, nothing special. A Silver Star recipient, yes, but one of thousands. A Vietnam veteran who'd done his duty and come home to live a quiet life. That's what we thought. 6 months after his death, I got a call from the Army Historical Division. A researcher named Dr. Patricia Williams. She was working on a comprehensive history of SOG operations and had come across my father's name in recently declassified documents. "Your father," she said, "did something extraordinary in April 1971. I think the official record doesn't fully reflect what happened that day. Would you be willing to speak with me?" That conversation led to 3 years of research. Dr. Williams dug through archives, tracked down surviving SOG veterans, located the pilot my father had saved, pieced together the truth from 50-year-old classified files. Captain James Wilson, the pilot, was still alive. Retired as a colonel after a full Air Force career, living in Colorado Springs. He'd spent the last 50 years not knowing the name of the Army sergeant who'd saved his life. Dr. Williams connected us. I called Colonel Wilson. We talked for 3 hours. "Your father, Wilson told me, his voice breaking. Came through hell to get me. I was barely conscious. I'd been beaten for 2 days. I heard gunfire, explosions, thought it was the end. Then, this sergeant was there, cutting me loose, half carrying me to a helicopter I didn't even know had landed. He had blood all over him. I could see he was wounded. But he was still moving, still fighting, still giving orders. I wanted to thank him. I tried. But by the time I was medically cleared, the mission had been classified and I was ordered to never discuss it. Wilson had tried over the years to find the man who'd saved him. But SOG personnel records were classified. Names were redacted. The operation itself didn't officially exist. I owe him my life, Wilson said. For 50 years, I've carried that debt, and I never got to say thank you. Dr. Williams submitted her findings to the Army Awards Board. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witness statements from surviving SOG team members, Wilson's testimony, the classified after-action reports, medical records showing the severity of my father's wounds. The board agreed. Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez's actions met the criteria for the Medal of Honor. But because the action had occurred during a classified operation, the upgrade required special approval. It went through 3 separate review panels: Department of Defense Legal Review, National Security Council Review, even congressional notification. The process took 3 years. The letter arrived in December 2025. 54 years after my father earned it. 3 years and 9 months after he died. What I didn't know when I received that letter was how many families were in the same situation. Dr. Williams, the historian, explained it to me. During the Vietnam War, thousands of operations were classified. Cross-border raids into Laos and Cambodia, SOG missions deep into North Vietnam, CIA operations supporting anti-communist forces, long-range reconnaissance patrols into denied territory. Men performed acts of extraordinary valor in these operations, acts that would have earned medals of honor, Distinguished Service Crosses, Navy Crosses. But because the operations were classified, the awards were downgraded or given under sanitized citations that stripped away the actual context. And most of those classifications remain in effect, even now, more than 50 years later. Your father's case, Williams told me, was relatively straightforward because the SOG operations in Laos have been largely declassified. But there are other operations, other theaters, where the classification is still active. Families will never know the truth of what their loved ones did. The injustice of that hit me hard. These men served, they fought, they bled, they died. And their heroism can't even be properly acknowledged because of bureaucratic security classifications that serve no current purpose except to hide past embarrassments. I started connecting with other families, sons and daughters of SOG veterans, people whose fathers or grandfathers had served in classified operations and received awards that didn't reflect their actual actions. The stories were eerily similar to my father's: sanitized citations, generic language about combat operations in Southeast Asia, silver stars or bronze stars for actions that clearly warranted higher recognition, and the silence, always the silence. These men, even after the operations were declassified, still kept quiet. The culture of secrecy was so deeply ingrained that they couldn't bring themselves to talk about it. They'd signed the papers, they'd taken the oath. They'd been told this never happened so many times that they internalized it. My father went to his grave believing his service would never be fully recognized, that the truth of what he did would remain classified forever. That Captain Wilson would never know the name of the sergeant who saved his life. He was wrong, but he died believing he was right. In January 2026, the formal Medal of Honor ceremony was scheduled. It would be posthumous, presented to my mother. The president would make the presentation. Full military honors. The works. But my father wouldn't be there to receive it. That's what sticks in my throat, the injustice of it. Not that the award was delayed, though that's bad enough, but that the system waited until the man who earned it was dead. I've read the history now. The bureaucratic maze these upgrades have to navigate, the reviews, the panels, the legal assessments, the resistance from agencies that want to protect old secrets, the slow, grinding pace of military bureaucracy. But here's what I keep coming back to. They had the information. The after-action reports existed in 1971. The witness statements were collected then. The evidence of my father's heroism was documented by his own chain of command. The decision to downgrade his award wasn't about lack of evidence. It was about political convenience, about maintaining the fiction that we weren't operating in Laos, about protecting the narrative rather than honoring the truth. And that decision stood for 54 years. Colonel Wilson attended the Medal of Honor ceremony. So did 3 of the SOG team members who served with my father that day, all in their 70s now, all carrying 50 years of classified memories. One of them, Master Sergeant Ronald Bishop, retired, pulled me aside after the ceremony. "Your father was the best NCO I ever served under," he said. "That day in Laos, he saved all our lives, not just Wilson, all of us. The way he led that assault, the way he kept us together when everything was falling apart, the courage it took to do what he did while bleeding from 3 bullet wounds. I've never seen anything like it." "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked. "Why didn't you push for the upgrade when he was alive?" Bishop looked down. "We were told not to. Told that the operation was classified, that our statements couldn't be used for awards purposes. And after a while, you stop fighting the system. You figure if they don't want to acknowledge it, there's nothing you can do." "But you could have," I said. Not accusing, just stating fact. "Yeah," he admitted. "We could have, and we should have. That's something I'll have to live with." The ceremony was beautiful. The president spoke about my father's service, about sacrifice, about classified heroes who serve in silence. My mother received the medal, tears streaming down her face. My kids, my father's grandchildren, stood at attention in their own uniforms, both following family tradition into the Army. But the whole time, all I could think was, Dad should be here. Dad earned this. Dad should get to hear these words, receive this honor, know that his service was finally recognized. Instead, he died thinking he was forgotten. After the ceremony, I spent months going through my father's personal effects more carefully. Things I'd packed away after his death, not ready to deal with. I found journals, not detailed accounts. He wasn't the type to keep a diary, but scattered entries, dates, locations, notes to himself. April 9th, 1971. Got Wilson out. Patterson didn't make it. 20 years old. Wrote his mother. Didn't tell her the truth. Couldn't. April 9th, 1972. 1 year. Still see Patterson's face. Still hear Wilson calling for help. Still feel those bullets hitting. Anniversary of the day I failed. Failed. My father thought he failed because one man died. Never mind that he saved 11 others. Never mind that he completed an impossible mission while wounded 3 times. In his mind, one man dead meant failure. That's the burden they carry. All of them. The ones who came home while brothers didn't. I found letters too, from Derek Patterson's mother. She'd written to my father after her son's funeral, thanking him for trying to save her boy. My father had apparently written to her, told her that Derek died quickly, a lie. He'd bled out over 20 minutes while they fought toward the extraction point. That he was brave, true, that he didn't suffer another lie. Mrs. Patterson wrote, "Thank you for being with my son at the end. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for caring enough to write to me when the Army couldn't be bothered to tell me how he really died." My father kept that letter for 50 years. I found a photograph, grainy, black and white, creased from being folded and unfolded countless times. 12 men in tiger-stripe fatigues, weapons at the ready, standing in front of a Huey helicopter. I recognized my father immediately, young, 23 years old, still healthy, before the wounds that would mark him forever. On the back, in my father's handwriting, Prairie Fire team, day before Laos, Derek Patterson, front row, second from left. Didn't know it was our last mission together. I contacted all the families I could find, the children of the men in that photograph. Most of them, like me, knew almost nothing about their father's service. One or two had bits and pieces. None had the full story. Together, we pieced it together. Between the declassified documents, the surviving team members' memories, and the few records our fathers had kept, we reconstructed what actually happened in Laos on April 9, 1971. It was worse than any of us knew. The mission started as a compromise. Aerial reconnaissance had spotted a possible POW camp. Thermal imaging suggested American prisoners might be held there. But the location was deep in Laos, in an area crawling with NVA troops. Command wanted to send a larger force. SOG leadership argued for a small team moving fast. They compromised. 12 men, quick insertion, locate the camp, assess the situation, extract if possible, but primarily gather intelligence. My father's team inserted at night, 3 clicks from the target. They moved through triple canopy jungle in complete darkness, no lights, using compass and memory. 5 hours of movement to reach overwatch positions on the camp. What they found wasn't a POW camp. It was a temporary holding facility. The NVA had been moving prisoners north toward Hanoi and had stopped for a few days in this clearing. Only one American was being held there, Captain Wilson. The rest of the prisoners the thermal imaging had detected were NVA troops resting. About 40 of them, not the 20 my father's team had been briefed on. Any sane commander would have called for extraction. The mission parameters didn't include assaulting a superior force. They were recon, not direct action. But my father saw a fellow American being beaten by NVA guards. He saw Wilson's condition deteriorating. He knew that if they left and waited for a larger force, Wilson would be moved or killed. So he made the call. Not to his commanding officer. They were in radio silence. Not to higher command. They were too far for relay. He made the call himself, on the ground, with 11 men looking to him for leadership. "We're getting him," he told his team. "Here's how." The assault plan was insane. But it was also the only thing that could work. Create maximum confusion, hit from multiple angles, extract under covering fire. Count on surprise and superior training to offset the numbers disadvantage. They hit at dawn. Grenades first, creating chaos. Then, assault from 3 directions simultaneously. My father led the main assault directly toward Wilson's position. The firefight was brutal. The after-action report, sanitized as it was, couldn't hide the intensity. 40 NVA troops against 12 Americans in close-quarters combat. Specialist Patterson was hit in the first 30 seconds. AK round through the chest. He went down calling for his mother. My father tried to reach him, tried to pull him to cover. That's when my father took his first wound, the shoulder shot, while exposing himself to get to Patterson. But Patterson was already gone, and the team had to keep moving or they'd all die. My father kept fighting, directed his men, cleared positions, kept them alive through sheer force of will and tactical excellence. They got to Wilson. Specialist Henderson and Corporal Ross cut him loose while my father provided covering fire. That's when he took the second and third wounds, ribs and thigh, while standing in the open, mag dumping his M16 to keep NVA heads down. The extraction helicopter came in under fire. 50 caliber rounds from an NVA position punched holes through the fuselage. My father's team had to suppress that gun to get the bird out. My father, bleeding from 3 wounds, assaulted that position himself, threw his last 2 grenades, then charged in with his rifle. Killed 3 NVA soldiers in hand-to-hand fighting, destroyed the gun. Only then did he allow himself to be pulled onto the helicopter. The flight back was touch and go. My father had lost so much blood that the medic thought he wouldn't make it, but he stayed conscious the whole flight, talking to Wilson, keeping him calm, making sure his team was accounted for. "Tell Patterson's mother," my father said as they landed. "Tell her he was brave." Then he passed out. 3 months in the hospital, multiple surgeries, physical therapy, medal ceremony where he received the Silver Star with a citation that bore no resemblance to what actually happened. And then silence, classified. Never speak of it. The mission never occurred. The pilot was never in Laos. The firefight never happened. Derek Patterson died in combat operations in the Republic of Vietnam. All of it buried under classification for 50 years. Standing at my father's grave after the posthumous Medal of Honor ceremony, holding the medal they finally gave him, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride. Yes. My father earned this. His actions that day were genuinely heroic by any standard. But also, anger. Anger at a system that classified his valor for political convenience. Anger at bureaucrats who decided a diplomatic fiction was more important than honoring courage. Anger at the 50 years stolen from him, 50 years where he could have been properly recognized, could have known that his sacrifice mattered, could have seen Captain Wilson again and known he'd made a difference. And sadness, deep, overwhelming sadness, that he died believing his service would never be acknowledged. That he went to his grave carrying the burden of classification, the weight of Derek Patterson's death, the pain of wounded memories that couldn't be shared. My mother, standing beside me, clutching the Medal of Honor case, said, "He knew." Somehow I think he knew he'd done something important. He never needed the medal to know that. Maybe she's right. Maybe my father didn't need external validation. Maybe the satisfaction of completing the mission, of saving Wilson's life, of bringing his team home, was enough. But I needed him to receive this recognition. I needed the country to acknowledge what he did. I needed the record to reflect the truth. And I wish, more than anything, that it had happened while he was alive. The ceremony included a presentation of the full citation. The real citation, not the sanitized version from 1971. It detailed the Laotian operation, named the location, described the enemy forces, acknowledged the cross-border nature of the mission. All the details that had been classified for 50 years were now public record. Because my father was being given the nation's highest honor, the government finally admitted what really happened. Colonel Wilson gave a statement that was read during the ceremony. "Staff Sergeant Carlos Martinez saved my life. He came into enemy territory, fought against overwhelming odds, and pulled me out of hell. He was wounded 3 times doing it. I never got to thank him. I spent 50 years wishing I could. I hope, wherever he is, he knows that I remembered, that I'm grateful, that I told his family what he did for me. Carlos, if you can hear this, you saved more than my life that day. You gave me 50 more years with my wife, my children, my grandchildren. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but it's all I have. So thank you, brother. Thank you for not leaving me behind." There wasn't a dry eye in the ceremony. My father's story is one of thousands. Thousands of classified operations, thousands of heroes whose service can't be fully acknowledged, thousands of families left with partial truths and unanswered questions. If this story moved you, if you understand the importance of honoring these hidden sacrifices, please subscribe. Daily uploads, bringing you the stories that need to be told, the recognition that should have happened long ago. We're building a community that refuses to forget. The Medal of Honor now sits in my mother's living room. She has it displayed with my father's other decorations, his photos from Vietnam, his dress uniform. Sometimes I catch her just sitting there, looking at it, talking to my father's photo. "They finally gave it to you, Carlos," she says. "Took them long enough, but they finally gave it to you." I've thought a lot about the classification system that buried my father's story, the logic behind it, the necessity in some cases of operational security, the protection of sources and methods, the diplomatic considerations. I get it. I served. I held clearances. I understand why some things need to be secret. But 50 years? 50 years to acknowledge that an American soldier performed an act of extraordinary valor? 50 years to tell a family the truth about why their loved one earned recognition? 50 years to let a pilot thank the man who saved his life? That's not security. That's bureaucratic inertia masquerading as necessity. The operations in Laos during the Vietnam War were declassified in the 1990s. The government acknowledged SOG. The missions were made public. Books were written. Documentaries were made, but individual awards stayed locked. Individual stories stayed classified. Individual heroes stayed anonymous. Why? Not because revealing them would compromise national security, but because the bureaucracy that classified them in 1971 never got around to unclassifying them. Because nobody wanted to do the work. Because the system defaults to secrecy. My father paid the price for that inertia. Dr. Williams, the historian, told me she's identified at least 15 other SOG veterans whose awards were downgraded due to classification. 15 that she knows of, with access to partial records. The real number is probably much higher. Most of them are dead now. The youngest Vietnam veterans are in their 70s. Time is running out to make these corrections, to honor these men properly, to give their families the truth. But the bureaucracy moves slowly. Review boards meet quarterly. Legal assessments take months. Congressional notifications require committee schedules. The whole process that took 3 years for my father could take just as long for each of the others. And most won't make it. Most will die before the paperwork completes. Most will never know. That's the tragedy. Not just that my father waited 50 years, but that the system learned nothing from his case. The same obstacles, the same delays, the same bureaucratic maze exists for every other veteran seeking recognition. We've made it fractionally faster. The process that took 54 years for my father might take 40 years for someone else. That's progress, I suppose. Cold comfort for the families who wait. I've become an advocate, working with Dr. Williams and others to identify cases that need review, helping families navigate the bureaucracy, pushing for systematic reform of the awards upgrade process. It's exhausting work, frustrating work. The military bureaucracy is designed to resist change, to protect established procedures, to move at its own glacial pace. But every case we resolve matters. Every family that gets the truth matters. Every veteran who finally receives proper recognition matters, even if they're not alive to receive it. My father's story is over. He lived his life, served his country, raised his family, and died thinking his service would never be fully acknowledged. The Medal of Honor arrived too late for him to hold it, but it still means something. It means the record is corrected. It means future generations will know what he did. It means Captain Wilson finally got to say thank you. It means Derek Patterson's sacrifice is properly contextualized. It means the 11 men who came home can point to official recognition of what they endured together. It matters. My father used to say, "Some things stay in the valley, Tommy. Some things don't come home." He was wrong. The things he left in that valley, the blood, the fear, the courage, the sacrifice, did come home. They came home in his nightmares, in his scars, in his silence. They came home in the burden he carried every day for 50 years, but now, finally, they came home in another way, in recognition, in honor, in truth. 50 years late, but still home. There are too many stories like my father's, too many veterans whose service has been classified, too many families waiting for truth that may never come, too many honors delayed until after death. But we keep fighting, we keep researching, we keep pushing for recognition. Because these stories matter, these sacrifices matter, these lives matter. Tomorrow I'll be back with another story, another truth that needs to be told, another veteran who deserves to be remembered. Until then, hold your loved ones close. And if you know a veteran, ask them about their service, even if they can't tell you everything, even if parts of their story are still classified. Let them know their service matters, that you remember, that you're grateful, because sometimes that's all they need to hear. The aftermath of the Medal of Honor ceremony brought unexpected connections. Families of other SOG veterans reached out. People who'd lived with the same partial truths, the same classified silences, the same bureaucratic delays. One woman, Sarah Bishop, contacted me through the historian Dr. Williams. Her grandfather, Master Sergeant Ronald Bishop, had been on my father's team in Laos. He'd passed away in 2020, 2 years before my father. She'd spent her entire life knowing her grandfather had served in Vietnam, but knowing almost nothing about what he'd actually done. He had nightmares, she told me over the phone. He'd wake up screaming about someone named Patterson, about a valley, about not being able to go back. My grandmother said he'd been in some kind of special operations, but the details were classified. He never talked about it. Even at the end, when he was dying, he kept those secrets. I shared what I'd learned, the Prairie Fire mission, the rescue of Captain Wilson, the firefight, Derek Patterson's death, her grandfather's role in my father's team. He was a hero, I told her. They all were. And the fact that he kept that secret his entire life, honored his classification even when it cost him peace of mind, says everything about his character. "I wish he'd known," she said, crying. "I wish he'd lived long enough to see your father get the Medal of Honor, to know that the mission was finally acknowledged, to understand that his silence wasn't for nothing." "It wasn't for nothing," I said. "They completed the mission. They brought Wilson home. They brought each other home. Everything after that, the classification, the delays, the bureaucratic failures, those were betrayals by the system. But the mission itself, that was perfect. That was heroic. And now the record reflects it." Another family reached out about Specialist Derek Patterson. His sister, now in her 70s, had spent 50 years knowing her baby brother died in Vietnam, but never knowing the circumstances. The official story said, "killed in action during combat operations." Nothing about the rescue mission, nothing about the heroism, nothing about the sacrifice that saved 11 other men. We arranged to meet at Arlington National Cemetery at Patterson's grave. I brought my father's Medal of Honor. Colonel Wilson flew in from Colorado. The 3 surviving team members who'd been at the ceremony came as well. We told her the truth, the whole truth, what her brother had done, how he died, that my father had tried to reach him, had been wounded trying to save him, that his death, tragic as it was, had happened during a mission that rescued an American pilot and brought a team home. She wept. For her brother. For the 50 years of not knowing. For the incomplete story she'd carried her entire life. "Thank you," she said, placing her hand on her brother's headstone. "Thank you for finally telling me what happened to my baby brother, for letting me know he was a hero." That moment, watching this elderly woman finally learn the truth about her brother's death, crystallized everything wrong with the classification system. She'd had a right to know for 50 years, and the government had denied her that right for bureaucratic convenience. The impact of my father's posthumous Medal of Honor extended beyond our family. It opened doors for other SOG veterans seeking recognition. 3 other cases are now under review by the Army Awards Board, all of them involving cross-border operations, all of them with sanitized citations that don't reflect the actual heroism involved. Dr. Williams is leading the research effort. She's building comprehensive case files, tracking down surviving witnesses, locating the classified after-action reports that document what really happened. It's painstaking work. The bureaucracy resists every step, but progress is happening. "Your father's case set a precedent," she told me. "It proved that even after 50 years, even after the recipient has died, these awards can be upgraded. That matters. It gives us a template for pursuing other cases." I've become an unofficial advocate for this work, speaking at veteran events, connecting families with researchers, pushing congressional representatives to support awards review legislation. It's not the career I trained for, but it's become my mission. Because my father deserved better. All of them deserved better. And the only way to ensure future generations of service members aren't treated the same way is to fix the system now. One of the most powerful moments came 6 months after the Medal of Honor ceremony. I received a letter from Captain James Wilson. Not an email, a handwritten letter. 6 pages of precise script on expensive stationery. In it, he detailed his 50 years of trying to find the man who saved his life. The dead ends, the classified blocks, the bureaucratic runarounds, and his profound gratitude that, even though my father had passed, the truth had finally emerged. "Your father saved more than my life that day in Laos," Wilson wrote. "He gave me 50 more years with my family. I watched my children grow up. I held my grandchildren. I had a career, a life, decades of joy and purpose. None of that would have existed without his courage. I wish I could have told him that personally. Since I can't, I'm telling you, your father was the finest soldier I ever knew. And I've spent 50 years being grateful he existed." That letter is framed in my home office. I read it whenever I'm frustrated by the slow pace of bureaucratic change. It reminds me what this is really about. Not bureaucracy, not awards, but the human cost of secrecy, the lives affected, the gratitude that needs to be expressed, the truths that need to be told. My children, my father's grandchildren, have both chosen military careers. My son is an Army Ranger. My daughter is an Apache pilot. They wear their grandfather's legacy with pride. The Medal of Honor ceremony was formative for both of them. Understanding what their grandfather did, why it was hidden, and why truth matters. "Grandpa's silence taught me something," my son said. "Sometimes the hardest part of service isn't the mission. It's carrying what you can't talk about. Grandpa carried that burden his whole life. We should honor that by making sure other service members don't have to carry the same weight. That's the ultimate goal. Not just correcting historical injustices, but preventing future ones. Creating a system where classified operations can still be acknowledged in ways that don't compromise legitimate security needs, where heroism can be recognized without requiring 70 years of bureaucratic delay. Is that possible? I don't know. The national security apparatus is vast and complex. Classification serves real purposes, but somewhere between total transparency and total secrecy, there has to be a middle ground, a way to honor service without betraying operational security. My father's story suggests we haven't found that balance. 54 years between earning recognition and receiving it. 3 years and 9 months between death and ceremony. Generations of family living with incomplete truths. That's not security. That's dysfunction masquerading as necessity. The work continues. More cases under review. More families searching for truth. More veterans carrying classified burdens. And slowly, incrementally, the system is changing. Awards are being reviewed. Classifications are being lifted. Truth is emerging. Too late for my father. Too late for most of the men who earned recognition decades ago. But maybe not too late for the next generation. Maybe not too late to build a better system. That's what keeps me fighting. Not for my father, his fight is over. But for the service members still serving. For the families still waiting. For the truth that still needs to be told. My father served with honor in Vietnam. He completed an impossible mission. He saved 11 men and a downed pilot while wounded 3 times. He carried that secret for 50 years, and he died believing his service would never be properly acknowledged. He was wrong, but only barely. Only because people kept fighting for truth even after he was gone. That's not good enough. We need to do better. For them, for him, for everyone who serves and deserves to have their service honestly recognized. 50 years was too long to wait. Let's make sure the next generation doesn't have to wait at all.